I had a love-hate relationship with some of my grad classes because of my anxiety around participation. Needing to participate in class or work can be a big barrier for folks who are neurodivergent, especially for those of us who are autistic. I really wanted to perform well, but I struggled to figure out how I could participate and when I should say something or how I should say something. When I had something to say, oftentimes it was difficult for me to figure out when I could jump into that conversation. And sometimes when I did have something to say, the conversation moved on before I had a chance to say that. Especially early in my career, I struggled to follow the conversations, which made participation especially tricky for me. When I received my autism diagnosis, everything clicked. Of course I was struggling with participation in graduate class because I had largely struggled with social cues, and those cues were the things that I needed to know in order to figure out how to participate. And so I've started working on strategies that I can use to participate in meetings, in graduate classes, and that I hope to share with you to help you with your participation. So in this video, we're going to cover my top 5 tips for how to increase your participation grade in graduate classes. The first tip I call priming, and this is when you ask your professor to give you some instructions or ideas of what the conversations are going to be about before you go to class. This is simple as stopping by your professor's office, asking things like what should you pay attention to in the readings, what should you be prepared to say. You may even ask for a schedule or agenda in advance of your meeting, or maybe you can ask your professor to put the agenda on the board so you can prepare your thoughts and comments before you get to that topic in the class itself. Now, of course, these conversations can be anxiety-inducing. It can be anxiety-inducing to go to your professor and ask about what the class will cover. So you can always ask a friend to come help you have that conversation. You could also send an email to your professor before the class starts or during the first week of the class, letting them know that you struggle with more participation, but you want to do well, and so you're wondering if you can talk about what kinds of things you should be prepared to talk about in class. Now, if you have these conversations with your professor and you're primed for the conversations you're going to have in class, the next thing that you can do is write out preemptive comments. And so that's my second tip. Write out comments and questions preemptively. As you're going through the readings, make notes of what you can comment about, what questions that you have. And so when you get to class, you have a list of things that you want to say or that you could ask, and you can fit those into the moments that are most relevant in the class session. And so if you know that there's going to be a reading and you have comments about that, you can have those comments written out and ready to go for when you start discussing that reading. Now, priming and preemptive comments are things that you can do before class, but during class, it's also helpful to deep breathe to help your anxiety as it relates to participation. I talk a lot about 4-square breathing on this channel, and I really suggest 4-square breathing if you're in class and you're struggling to figure out what to say and you're feeling anxious about not knowing what you want to say. 4-square breathing is when you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold again. And the reason I recommend this during class is because it's not really that noticeable if you're doing 4-square breathing, and it helps you, again, focus in on the conversation and helps you reduce that anxiety that you're feeling during the class. Now, after the first week or 2 of class, you can move on to my 4th and 5th tips. My 4th tip is simple, and that is to get specific feedback from your professors about your participation. Again, you can bring a friend with you if you're anxious to have this conversation, or you can send an email, but talk directly to your professor about what you can do to improve your participation and talk with them about how they have been thinking about your participation up until this point. Participation can be kind of an amorphous concept, and so getting to know your professor and what they are expecting from you is a good step to making sure you're getting a good participation grade in your class. Now, when you have this conversation, you can move on to the 5th tip, which is to create an engagement plan of some sort. As you're discussing ways you can improve your performance in the class, it's also important to ask your professor if things can be done to help you improve that performance. So for example, maybe your professor is just kind of relying on discussion to kind of move organically, and there are not really pauses or stops in the discussion. You could ask your professor if it's all right for people to start raising their hand to give you a better opportunity to figure out how you can join the conversation. Maybe it's asking your professor to take a few pauses here and there so you can jot down your thoughts before you have to say them out loud. Again, work with your professor to ensure that you are able to participate in the way that you need to participate to succeed. All of this goes back to showing your professor that you do care, you do want to participate, and you do want to succeed in the course, and showing your professor your motivation will help you and your professor figure out how you can get a strong participation grade. And now, of course, it should not just be up to you to ensure that you are able to get that participation grade. It is up to all of us, including professors and administration, to ensure that there is accessibility and inclusion in the classroom. And we all should be working to build that inclusive, transformative place of working and learning. And so that's why in our next video, we're going to talk about things that professors and bosses can do to think about participation in new ways that will affirm neurodivergent students and neurodivergent employees. So please check out our next video on that.